Up until recently, I was a bit of a snob about what I would buy on the Nintendo eShop. This was until a close friend taught me that just because a game doesn't have a substantial price tag, doesn't mean it can't provide a substantial experience. I don't think any of these hidden gems that I've played have sparked my interest as much as the creepy adventure game Redbow. Created by the Australian one-man dev team Stranga Studios, Redbow found itself to be quite an interesting experience. Before we investigate this one specific game, I think it's only fair to investigate the creator himself. Taken from his Patreon, Nathan is a full-time game designer, pixel artist, and game composer of 6 years. In case you were wondering, you did hear that right, he does all of those himself. I was impressed enough with this feat that I reached out to him to ask him some questions, and luckily enough, he agreed. It was an interview over text, so for the sake of not listening to my voice more than you need to, I'm going to have my friend, twitch.tv/NormalThumbs, narrate these responses for you all. If you like his voice, be sure to check out his YouTube and Twitch in the description below. Now, let's get into the review. If you were a fan of indie horror games in the early 2010s, then the gameplay of Redbow will be nothing new to you. Like games such as Ib, the bulk of this game is walking, finding and interacting with items, and talking to the troubled individuals you meet throughout your journey. Not only were the inspirations of these horror icons obvious, but Stranga himself shared some of his favorites, saying,
"My love of video games is what drove me to create my own. Some of my favorite games of all time are on the PS1, specifically the horror genre. I'm a big fan of the Resident Evil and Silent Hill series, and they both have a big impact on my games."
Different choices that you make based on the core gameplay elements can lead your character Ro towards several endings. Depending on the path they take, the player can end up with a good, bad, or true ending for both each individual level and the game in its entirety. This resembled a less forgiving story progression akin to that of Shadow the Hedgehog from 2005. And that's it. There were no other games to do something like this. The idea of multiple endings is a good way to flesh out the undeniably short game, but where the issue arises is how one can naturally experience these endings. Without a guide, I don't believe there was any way I would find myself being able to see the true ending of the game. Figuring out which ending was good or bad was a breeze, but doing the true ending felt like I was doing that one glitch from Super Mario World where you skip the whole game. And by that, I mean there was a lot of random things that didn't feel like they need to happen. And if it's not in the right order, there's not a chance of reaching the true ending in the game, which is sad, because the true ending embodies the best part of the experience, the story. To keep this brief so you can still play and experience the game, Redbow follows a girl, Ro, traveling through a purgatory of sorts, helping lost souls make peace with themselves and the lives they've left behind. If done wrong, this concept could very well be quite superficial. That's not the case, however, as all the more insightful and existential thoughts felt like they were coming from a real place and not a corporate shill pushing to get it out before a deadline. I couldn't imagine the place you'd have to put yourself to create these situations.
The direction I see most writers take is that they direct their narrative to relate somewhat to them, where I'd rather try to relate to the audience. Making up the dilemmas isn't something easy, it's quite hard or gut-wrenching at times.
All the while, there were certain interactions and moments that felt just a bit over the top, and personally, I believe that's exactly what the game needed. Some of these weren't even meant to be taken seriously, including my favorite line, "Time to fry, ugly lady." It's funny with context, but I think it's even funnier without. These moments could still be taken seriously, but the nature of the interactions managed to add a needed smile in an otherwise bleak atmosphere. Speaking of atmosphere, how is it that this game presents its world? The pixel art style is cute and the game strikes a good medium between simplicity and complexity. Originally, I wrote a whole paragraph about how the lighting gave me a lot of trouble, but upon playing it again, I realized I'm actually just dumb and I could see everything fine. Regardless, I still do believe that the game does a splendid job using the environment to both tell its story and push the player along. The visuals were only matched by the music, which knew exactly when to amp up and exactly when to quiet down. The only thing it could use to get better is adding the pirate ship song to Spotify, because it really was a banger. I personally felt like the world this game took place in was its biggest strength, but very humbly, Stranga shared that he believed he had no one strength over any others.
I don't believe I have one big strength when it comes to developing games. Being a single developer, I rely more on lots of little strengths that all contribute to one another. It's like all those classes you took in high school are finally paying off. Art, music, math, English, etc. And I did less than average in all of those subjects. All of those little strengths are what make my games, and I believe that's what I do best.
The final criticism of the game, and the one that I saw the public bring up the most in my research, the game's very short. I mean, I 100% of the game in exactly 68 minutes. This was not too big of an issue considering the cost, and makes more sense when you keep in mind that making a small game was exactly the developer's intention. Red Bow was meant to be a small, kind of filler game between his big releases, to both appease fans and keep food on the table while developing other games. I especially can't fault him as that's what I'm doing here, kind of making a smaller review as school has kept me busy and away from making content. A short game being his intention does not mean that he believes his game's length was perfect, and he was not hesitant to share what he felt like was his biggest struggle in designing games in general.
Probably learning patience. I'm a sucker for rushing things because I'm a live-by-the-clock sort of person. I made that mistake with Red Bow and I'll always regret it because it could have been better. I was still happy with how it came out, but there could have been more stories to tell. I'm taking my time with Ashina, the Red Witch, and you can tell it looks and feels way more polished than something that only took a few months to make. Take your time with things to make changes or fixes early rather than at the last minute. It makes for a much better game and experience in the end.
Also on the topic of his next big release, this feels like a good time to begin closing out this video with an advertisement for Stranga's next big release. Resembling the epitome of the best pieces of Red Bow, Ashina the Red Witch is a game that we actually don't know all too much about. At the conclusion of our interview, I asked Stranga if he had any insider info on the game, and I'll let you hear what he had to say.
Unfortunately, at this time, I can't say for a full release. However, I have scheduled the first few chapters to be released in early access on Steam near the end of February. That is, hopefully at least. It will be drifting a little from the horror genre and more into the adventure category, but that doesn't mean it won't have those creepy moments. I'm hoping that fans of my previous titles, as well as the new fans, will enjoy Ashina the Red Witch.
If you're interested in fun updates like these, be sure to follow him on Twitter @StrangaGames or even donate to his Patreon. I'll have the link in the description. If you're interested in hearing updates from me, follow me on TikTok or Twitter @HaydenIRL and @Hayden_IRL_ respectively. Posting on all platforms has slowed as, like I said before, school has begun again. I'm currently working on some smaller projects to allow myself to still create while I'm unable to work on larger projects all the time. Speaking of which, I should go probably wrap this up and write another annotated bibliography. Or at least figure out what that means. In the meantime, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It's free, so you'll always get your money's worth.